Gabriel again. I believe I left off at age structure diagrams with you. So when you look at an age structure diagram, we're just looking at how the population is distributed by age and by a couple other categories. Those categories are male versus female and pre-reproductive versus reproductive versus post-reproductive age groups. We also look at our dependent group, which is at the bottom of our age structure diagram. These are kids under 15 that depend on some kind of care, and people over 65 that also depend on care. Now, when we look at the bumps, the indents, the bulges, and we look at the shape of the diagram, there are a couple other things that you can take away. For example, if it's very broad in shape, and we see people way up high, then these are age cohort groups, by the way. If they're up high, that means we have a population that is living longer. If we compare the male side to the female side, that shows us the pretty obvious one worldwide. The worldwide, women are living longer than men. And if we have a very broad shape at the top, it means that people are living longer in this population group. If we have bulges, the bulges can indicate a period where we had a lot of immigration coming into the country, or this period here where this bulge is could have occurred, these people are 40 to 44 years old, could have occurred all the way down here when they were born. And if that's the case, we have to look at the history, the historical age structure diagrams for that country. And that tells us that there was a baby boom during that age cohort group. Other things, if we have a very narrow base, that means the base is smaller than the bars above it. Then we have a smaller number of children, which means we have a lower birth rate. If we see indents, indents can mean that there was war either during this period or during a period down here. It could have meant famine, which is starvation, or disease broke out. So this is a typical age structure diagram that's shaped like a pyramid. So this is our age pyramid, and a population pyramid that is shaped like a pyramid is usually associated with a less developed country, less developed. This one right here is showing us a highly developed or more developed country. We see that a lot of people are living in that much older age group, which means they probably have access to a lot of healthcare and medicine and food and nutrition. We see that at one time they were pyramid shaped, and over 50 years ago, they started having less and less children, which is typical of a more developed country because as more people are in the workforce, then children cost more when you are working and you just have to pay for them to eat, have food, and go to school. So in a more developed country, they start having less children, plus the children are surviving. They don't need to have as many when they give birth to them. This is more columnar shaped. So a more column shaped country is typically associated with a more stable population. Now, when we look at the ones in the book, I want you to notice the cohorts are now just in one age, which is fine because you can pretty much figure out what the age range is. We still see colors for the pre-reproductive, the reproductive, and the post-reproductive age groups. And if you compare one country to the other, you can see where people are living to the older ages, and older age is associated with health and medicine, like access to healthcare. We can see countries that might have more females, they're heavy on the female side. We can see countries that are having many less children. So if you look at India and China, they take up the bulk of the world's population. China is the leader in the world, and you can't really tell at a glance looking at these, but your x-axis in these pyramid or age structure diagrams is shown in millions and not in percents. If you look at China, we have our x-axis goes up to 70 million, but in the United States, we only go up to 15 million. And that means we count this bar plus this bar plus this bar plus this bar. We count all the bars together, and that adds up to our millions. Or we can do the distribution by percent. So Germany definitely has a declining population. We'll talk more about what that means in a few minutes. Now, the Earth, the world, has over 7.6 billion people. China has 1.4 billion of those people. India has almost that, 1.36 billion of those people as of October 2019. But we haven't even reached a billion. Okay, so some of the big takeaways, we've done a lot of this in class, so you just need to look at your notes and look at your work in class. But the big takeaways, if it's a pyramid, that means it's a rapidly growing population. If it's column shaped, that means that the population is stable. It is not growing rapidly anymore whatsoever. If it's a highly developed country, we might see, as in Germany, that the population is declining. And China had that one-child policy. You could kind of see when it started taking effect. And in 2016, they actually lifted that policy, but that will eventually lead to a population decline. Okay, so other things that we look at are we compare these diagrams to demographic transition. So before I go into transition, I'm not going to read these to you. You are going to pause the video. You're going to read them to yourself because this is the worst thing ever. I don't need to waste my time for that. These are things that we talked about in class. They're pretty obvious, so go ahead and read them to yourself. Pause the video. Module 22 answers are BACAC. Pause and check those yourself. And now moving on to Module 23, where we're going to look at demographic transition. Okay, so here again are the age structure diagrams that we've been looking at. Quickly, we're going to discuss what this means for transition. So a country will start with a pretty slow population growth. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then they will go into rapid growth, where this pyramid definitely, like, is having lots of babies, then become reproductive and have lots of more babies, rapid growth. And that's our phase 1 going into phase 2, where we are now officially, like, we are rapid growth. And then our phase 3 is stable and steady. That's the US. And phase 4 is where our growth is declining. And you can tell because the reproductive age group is having less babies. So demographic transition is really just a theory. So that's where a country goes from a subsistence economy to industrialized. And it's related to affluence. So this is a theory. This can be disrupted and not work exactly as the theory goes if there's major war or something else occurs. So an MDC, more developed country, is one that has a higher level of industrialization and income. And a developing country, I've talked to you about this last time, is also referred to as an LDC, or less developed country, which has levels of industrialization and income that are low. They don't make a lot of money per person. Affluence, remember we've talked about this like 20,000 times in class, and that's having a lot of wealth and possessing a lot of things, including property. Okay, so here is our demographic transition model. If you look at phase 1 up here and look at phase 1 down here, this is typically what is the beginning of this, but this is not yet rapid growth. This is like slow growth going into rapid. We really don't have many countries left in this phase. We did talk about the one in class that's in Southern Africa. So a slow growth country is going to have birth rates that are very high, death rates that are very high, and the population therefore does not grow. So here's a period in time where the birth rates are high, the death rates are high, but the population is not growing, not yet growing. Phase 2, our birth rates are high, but they are slowly declining. However, at the same period in time, our death rates are low. So we have a lot of births and less people are dying. So now we are going to go into this rapid J exponential growth curve. That is why phase 2 in the demographic transition model is, related to the population pyramid. Whoops. Okay. And then we have the US is phase 3. So notice now our birth rate has declined. Our death rate is still very low. And because our population it's experiencing population momentum, we're still growing, but we're much more steady than we were because these two things have declined. And then you get into phase 4, and phase 4 is a country like Germany, like France, like the United Kingdom, where our death rates are actually a little higher than our birth rates because of our older population, and we've stabilized as far as size goes. But because of this right here, our young ones that are being born are not replacement level. So we have a declining population. Those are your stages. Now you also have to relate crude birth rate and crude death rate. So if it's phase 1, it's slow population growth. Crude birth rates and crude death rates are both high, but they're going to offset each other. That's why the population does not grow fast, because we have high birth and death rates. We go into phase 2 when we don't have as many deaths, usually because of more sanitation happening, more access to food, more health care, but our birth rates are still really high. Phase 3 is stable, like the US. People are having less children. Why are they having less children? Because the economy is better and they have an educational system. Education, education, education. And phase 4, which is the declining population, is always associated with a high affluence, so high economic development, and women are working. So they don't need to have children so early. They can have them later in life. Okay, you're going to pause this. You're going to test yourself on this stuff. I'm going to move on. Okay, so phase 1, one more time. Phase 1, you should be able to describe this, and here are some reasons for it. Phase 1, like the country Lesotho, which is in southern Africa, which was a British colony. They became independent in 1966, I think. They were a subsistence society or economy. They're very pre-industrial still, and they're farmers. So they have a very high birth rate, and they have a high death rate because they have lack of sanitation and healthcare. See how they're all related? Therefore, their population really doesn't grow yet, but they're going to transition into phase 2 eventually. So as they start industrializing and they get more access to healthcare, their death rates are going to drop. Their birth rates are probably going to remain the same for a while, because this is typically what we have found most countries go through when they begin to industrialize and when their economy grows. And because they probably still don't have birth control like many people in India, their population growth is still going to be very high. In the US and Canada, this is us, phase 3. Our birth rates have declined, our death rates are declining, we are rich, and we are a stable population, increased affluence. Japan, Germany, these are the ones we talked about in class, are phase 4. So their crude birth rate is definitely lower. Look, right here, I showed you right here, the blue line. Their birth rate is now lower than their death rate. They have more old people, they have no population growth, and because of that, they need to encourage immigration and more children in their country in order to support the dependents in their country. Okay, other things that you should take away from all this is per capita income, which is the total income, we'll go over more of this, the total income of the whole country divided by the number of people. Okay, so per capita is per person, but it includes the income of, all the country's wealth. So the United States per capita income is pretty high, and these countries that are really high are also, they're on this side of the graph. This side of the graph means that their total fertility rate, they're making a lot of money. That's part of this side of the graph. But notice that they're also lower in the graph, and that lower in the graph is associated with the lower fertility rate. Whereas the countries where people have like 3 cents to their name and they make no money, they're typically found on low income and a much higher fertility rate, typically. And I just explained some of this to you. So we've been going over this in class, and family planning has a lot to do with income as well. So fertility rates for people that are educated versus uneducated, we know the stats, which means if we want to help a country slow down their population growth, we're going to have to educate the women. And we're going to have to educate them with family planning and with skill sets that'll allow them to actually do other things besides farming and trying to get water for the family. And here are the stats. If you look at every single country here and you compare the women that have been educated, that's in orange, to the women in the same country that have not been educated, notice how many babies, on average, they have. 6.1 babies for a woman in Ethiopia that has not been educated. A woman in Ethiopia that has gone to school has a fertility rate of about 2. And that's the same for every country. So family planning and education, school-related education, really make a difference for dropping the fertility rate and the birth rate in a country, which will slow down its population growth. So again, we've talked about this several times. So population growth and economic development are going to contribute to using more resources, such as land, trees, harvesting of the trees, using the water, mining for resources, and that impacts the environment. And that is why we have to learn about population. All right, so 6.4 billion people live in developing countries. 1.2 of them, and that is it, live in the more developed countries like us. So find us. There we are. Why are we purple? Because we are developed. How many more purple countries are here in the top 12 as far as the most populous countries in the world? Only 3. And look at the ones that are the most populous in the world. They are developing countries. So this is where you get reminded of which countries are still developing and which are developed. Know this list. The 12 most populous countries in the world. China and India are by far the largest nations in the world. Only 3 of the 12 most populous countries are developed countries. And also remember the difference between a nation and a country. The country is that physical space that nations occupy. Okay, so population growth past and future. If you look at the past here, and then we're moving into the future over here. This is what we're looking at. Population growth in developed countries, right down here, has mostly ceased, while that in developing countries is slowing, but it's expected to continue beyond 2050. Think of that Beanpot lab that we did, that doubling time lab. You modeled 2 different populations and their growth. Do you remember that? You modeled a country that isn't growing in population anymore because they're making decisions like birth control. Like, do I really want to have a baby or not? Heads or tails? And these guys are always making the decision to have a baby. Makes them double quicker. All right, notice that the largest footprint is not the same as the most populous. So the footprint is how much land you have abused in order to suit your lifestyle, such as every pair of jeans that you wear is an acre of land that was used to grow the cotton. Your 3-minute shower, yeah, right. 30-minute shower is using 200 gallons of water, and water is not an unlimited resource. Fresh water is not an unlimited resource. So all these resources that you use, the electricity that you use for your house, you had to burn coal at a power plant to convert into electricity for you. That coal came from land somewhere. So that is why your footprint is so big. Here is us. We have a footprint that is 9 hectares per person in the United States. And this also has to do with your food that you buy. If you buy anything that is to be shipped on a truck, think of all the resources that had to be used for that truck. Now notice the people that are in the less developed countries and how small their footprint is. So again, notice that that largest footprint is not the same as the most populous countries. The most populous countries have the smaller footprints. And US has a footprint that is 5 times China and 10 times that of India. It's horrible. Okay, so for measuring resource use to compare countries, we use something called the IPAT equation. And you just have to remember what these things are. This has come up on a test before. So it's used to estimate impacts, but it's only useful if we are comparing groups. So the impact is the environmental impact. And we use information about the population, the affluence of a country, and their technology, like how developed they are. So the more possessions you have, the more resources you use, and the more impact you're going to have. That's what it boils down to. The more you possess, the more resources that you're using, and then you multiply that by the number of people that live in your country, and you have a higher impact. And you only have more resources if you have more affluence because you're buying these things. Here's an example of something I pulled out of a journal where they actually compared countries using the IPAT equation. So they looked at the population of countries, their affluence, their impact. And their impact was, look, here's their footprint right here, their personal impact. So it's just one example. So which one has a higher impact? Which one of these pictures? You can tell it's these guys. Which one are you most like? You're one of these guys. And why is that? Because you have more affluence and more technology, and our population is higher. So gross domestic product is how we, it's like a measurement, and it's how we define a country's wealth. And there are measures that we use for that, for GDP, which include how much consumers spend, the country's investments, government spending, and exports minus imports. And this is how we define the affluence of a country. And this is related to resource use, and this is related to impact from the IPAD equation. Okay, one of the last things we look at is local versus global impacts and urban impacts. So impacts, remember, just are always bad. And if it's a local impact, it's typically related to something rural, agriculturally based, like we've overused our land. This is a typical Harford County local impact. Local water pollution, a gasoline tank that was at a gas station burst and got into the groundwater. These are all localized, local impacts. Global impacts is it's something like an oil spill. It's going to go on the coastlines of every country. That's more global, putting more CO2 emissions in the atmosphere, which impacts the entire globe as far as increasing the temperature. We'll talk about that. And this one right here, urban area. That is where we have 1,000 people per square mile. It's a city, guys. So urban growth is happening all over the world. So by 2030, which is in purple, when you look at worldwide, they predict that 60% of our population is going to be living in urban areas. So right now, more than 75% of developed countries live in urban areas, 44 in developing. Okay, here is our developing. And less affluent urban residents have no access to treated water, treated sewage, transportation, and they accumulate solid waste and have nowhere to put it because they have no money, and they contribute to more pollution, but they do have smaller ecological footprints because they don't have to go as far and create as much damage to all the other land. So remember this urban living thing, because urbanization is definitely an environmental challenge. And we have to think about that with our future planning. If more people are moving into cities, we really need to think about how to make our lifestyles in cities more sustainable for the planet. And that was just squeezed into this chapter because we had to put it somewhere, but it's important, and we will be reviewing that. You can read those things on your own. So urban impacts, as far as like the top cities in the world where the most environmental damage is done, is Tokyo, and then New York is number 2. Do we have any other cities on here that you're familiar with? Pause it, take a look at them. Look what countries these the 20 largest urban areas are. Look at the countries that they're in. Pay attention to that kind of stuff. So New York is the most densely populated urban area or city in the U.S. And remember, urban areas are 1,000 people per square mile. Okay, the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. Make sure that you know about those final conclusions of the report. Read it here, and I will pause, or you will pause, and pay attention to the population momentum of China. Notice how it's growing. Notice the dates. I think this is just really cool. We already talked about population momentum. And that is the end of me showing you a video on population stuff. Ta-da! And there are the answers to 723 in the practice exams. That is the end of this video, guys. Good luck with studying for your Chapter 7 test. I hope this was helpful. Have a great day. Mrs. Gabriel signing out.